What he's trying to do at the moment is to head off the demands that there have been from President Zelensky and from a number of European governments for Ukraine to be considered as a credible member of NATO. That is anathema, of course, to Putin, who doesn't want to have NATO on his doorstep. He doesn't grasp, of course, that NATO is a voluntary alliance that is defensive of countries, many of which were once under the Russian jackboot. He wants to rebuild a Russian empire, regardless of the wishes of the countries and the governments concerned. But, leave that to one side. He has a real problem about Ukraine becoming eventually a member of NATO. Now, if that's not going to be part of the deal, and it perhaps can't be, then some sort of really strong military guarantees are going to be important. And that brings us to your point about how is that going to work? President Trump says no American boots on the ground. I don't know whether the French and the Germans and the British will want to have troops on the ground, but they will want to have them not very far away in the event that things do go wrong. Of course, although President Trump says that hundreds of billions of dollars of American taxpayers' money have been spent on Ukraine so far, it's not entirely true. And of all the money that's gone on military equipment, 83% of it has gone to American defense companies. So, it's not been just handouts. And so it's not surprising that he says that if there's to be more money, more arms, that they should be paid for by the Europeans. But it's already largely being paid for, shall we say, and it's already been good business for the American companies. But by saying we will strengthen Ukraine's defensive capabilities with this military equipment, then I think he's putting in place a credible alternative, I hope, to the possibility of eventual NATO enlargement. That's what that's all about. It's about giving Zelensky and the others in Ukraine an assurance that if there is a deal, and we haven't talked about territorial swaps and so on yet, we should come on to that, if there is a deal, that it's one that can be relied upon to be fair and lasting.
Can we just dig down a little bit more on what this credible deterrence framework would look like? And as we're talking about the different sort of aspects that we could see, we keep hearing this idea about air cover, and perhaps this is an area where the U.S. would be pushing forward the most here. Can you give us some insight into how these negotiations are happening behind closed doors when it comes to what the U.S. would actually supply to a security guarantee to make sure that a potential deal would actually get through?
Well, there's a lot of discussion still going on. There's a coalition of the willing meeting that was co-chaired by the French president and the British prime minister, I think, today. There are military chiefs getting together in Washington. I think there's a lot of the detail of what it really means that has got to be worked out. But we do know from President Zelensky that he would like to have, I think he said, 10 different Patriot missile systems on Ukrainian territory. These are very expensive, but they are super effective. And they are a very important part of the defense of Ukraine against ballistic missiles and other Russian hardware which might be fired there. Then I think other parts of it would be territorial guarantees. The president's talked about something that is Article 5 light. In other words, an attack on one country is an attack on us all. That is to say that if Ukraine was attacked, then the coalition of the willing, if not NATO members themselves, would regard it themselves as duty-bound to come to help Ukraine. But there's an awful lot of detail on this military side that's got to be hammered out, and I'm not sure that President Trump is very clear where he wants it to be, but he has understood that there will not be a deal unless there is something like that, and there is an arrangement whereby Ukraine can have its own credible military deterrent and equipment to withstand any further attacks. Because ultimately, nobody trusts Putin to keep his word. Perhaps President Trump does, but nobody else does. Anyone who's dealt with him knows that, as we saw on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine, he lies through his teeth. So there's got to be something which is, pretty strong and pretty credible if the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government are to go along with it.
Sir Peter, one thing President Donald Trump has made clear is his desire to move very quickly with this, and outlined together with European leaders yesterday a timetable of perhaps a bilateral meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian leaders within 2 weeks, and perhaps a trilateral meeting, including him, within 3 weeks. Is that overly optimistic, and what are the risks of moving at this pace?
Well, one of the benefits of having somebody like President Trump in the Oval Office is that he likes to move fast. Look at all the different things that he's done since he became president. Some of it we may like, some of it we may not, but he doesn't hang around. And he's a deal maker, as he likes to remind us regularly. So, and he also would like to see an end to the killing, as would we all. So I think he wants to get on with this. He doesn't think there's any need for a ceasefire, which is what Zelensky wants and what everybody else in the European side would like, and what the Chancellor of Germany and the French President reminded him was a requirement for progress towards some sort of a settlement. He's now moved off that because Putin didn't want to have a ceasefire. He wants to go straight to a settlement. But to do a settlement in very short order, when you're talking about territorial issues and guarantees and Putin's desire, frankly, to dismantle the entire post-Cold War European order, that's going to be very difficult, and that's a real problem. Let's hope that we can move fast. I think everybody would be delighted if there was rapid progress, but there are questions to be answered, such as what does the president mean by territorial exchanges or territorial swaps? Has anyone seen any sign of the Russians offering land of theirs in exchange for the land of Ukraine that they want to keep for themselves? I don't think we have. All we've seen is that there might just be the possibility of the Russians withdrawing from some little corners of Ukraine that they've already occupied in exchange for getting others. Well, that doesn't sound to me like a very fair deal. I'm not sure that it would to President Zelensky either. So these territorial issues, as well as the military guarantees and the broader political questions that we've touched on, this does take time. But President Trump is a man in a hurry. He went to Alaska. A couple of days later, there was everybody in the Oval Office. We've now got the coalition of the willing talking to each other. We've got military chiefs looking at the military guarantees question. It would be wonderful if we could make early progress, because each day that we speak, there are more people being murdered by Russian missile attacks on Ukraine.